Alright, I know a lot of you have been waiting for this, so it's another Class E settings video, and this is for the Sony A80J. I've gotten a lot of requests for this, so I decided what I wanted to do was get 100 hours on it, make sure it was broken in enough, and then I just did a factory reset. That way I can go through the initial setup here and just do everything as you're going to see it coming out of the box. So I tried to cut out some personal information type stuff, but most of this initial setup is very easy, straightforward. You can do this step with your phone and then sync up with your Google Home if you have an Android phone, and I think even on Apple you should be able to get the Google Home. Alright, so once you get through to this part, you just scan the QR code. It asks you some questions on the phone. I have it wired through Ethernet, so it automatically caught that. Then you pick the subscriptions that you have or whatever that you want it to install for you, and then you just give it some time and it starts downloading the apps, and then it'll be all set up for you. And then here's the Sony startup initialization screen, whatever, and then it'll drop you into the where you basically choose if you want to agree to sign up for stuff and all that kind of whatever. You can say no to most of it, maybe all of it. You can just see, I just scroll through the privacy policy. You can agree to all or proceed. It's up to you. I just clicked proceed just to see if it would work, and it does. There's Samba TV is the thing that will use your habits and location and whatever to recommend certain kinds of content. I decline that. Right here, if you have a cable box, antenna, whatever, you can do your channel searching and all that. Here's your HDMI devices. I had a pattern generator connected to HDMI 1 and then my receiver into 3. So let's talk about that for a minute. If you have a receiver or soundbar that uses HDMI, you need to use HDMI 3. That's the ARC or eARC port. And in a little bit here we'll talk about changing the settings for the HDMI ports. Here you can register your TV, you put in your email and whatever, and that's for the warranty information, deals, perks, whatever. I unchecked notifications but agreed to emails, and then if they send too many, I'm sure you can cancel that part later. It's going to check for updates. There isn't one right now. Again, this is that Samba TV thing. I disable that. I don't like it. I don't want it, but I don't really use the built-in apps anyway. I just did this for the setup process. Alright, so now it installs your apps, which takes however long based on how many apps you told it to install. Then I'm going to go through and show what the UI looks like, how your app layout is, your home screen, that kind of thing. And then go into some of the more basic first-time settings, check, see if there's an update, show how to check your network information, that kind of stuff. Then we need to make adjustments to the HDMI ports, and after all that's done, then we'll get right into the settings after that. So this is the built-in apps, the UI, the way it's laid out. One way or the other, it doesn't matter to me. I'm still going to use my own devices. Personal preference, it's up to you if you like it or not. So I switched over to HDMI 4, which is where I have my Xbox connected. If you have an Xbox Series X or PS5, PC, whatever you're using, you want that going to the HDMI 4 port, and then you're going to use 3 for your audio if you have a receiver or soundbar with HDMI ARC or eARC. Even if you don't, if you have a some kind of streaming device or a 4K Blu-ray player or something along those lines, I suggest putting that one into port 3, and then you'll set port 3 for Dolby Vision and port 4 for enhanced to get the 4K 120 Hz explaining that in a minute. So this is your TV information. Mine was saying, very low power on time, but that's because I just did the factory reset. So keep that in mind if you're keeping track of how long you've had the TV. If you do a reset, it's going to reset that clock. So mine had about 100 hours when I did the reset. I have a USB drive plugged in with color slides for break-in process. The TV, for whatever reason, could not read those files. I had to download an app called Photoo. It's F-O-T-O-O. It's a free app that I found that would run a slideshow of the pictures that I had. I'm sure a different, file type or whatever would probably work. I just didn't, bother spending time messing with that. Here you can adjust what's shown on your ambient screen, the time, the weather, and then you can set it up to show photos, personal photos, default whatever photos, as like a screensaver type deal. So here's your network settings where you can see the IP address of the TV and if you're on Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. Alright, so for your HDMI ports, you go to channels and inputs, and then external inputs and HDMI signal format. And then here, like I said, I recommend putting 3 as your Dolby Vision and then 4 as your enhanced, because if you are in enhanced, you cannot view any Dolby Vision on that port, and if you're in Dolby Vision on that port, you cannot get 4K 120. So you would either have to manually switch back and forth every time, or just send your Dolby Vision to one and your 4K 120 to another. It sucks, but that's the way it is due to the EDID or EDID. Anyway, so here I'm just checking the audio settings and going through to set up the ER correctly to my receiver. So I have audio system as speakers. I don't use the center speaker mode. Don't need any of the Bravia stuff. This is a way to connect to Sony audio stuff, not what I have. So you can see right there, 2 down is ER mode. That needs to be on auto. If you have an older receiver that only supports ARC, then you would leave that off. Then if you want Dolby and DTS to pass through, you need to put pass through on auto. Dolby Digital Plus should be left alone unless you are using regular ARC. And then the digital audio out, if you have a newer receiver that supports everything, you want it on auto 1. If you start having some issues, you can try auto 2 if it's a certain soundbar or whatever. And then PCM is your fallback in case you have issues with Dolby and DTS. So that's all of that. Then you have your pixel shift here and your panel refresh. Panel for refresh, you can manually do that when you want to, but it will do it when the TV's off. I just turned off pixel refresh right there because I'm going to be doing calibration and I don't want it to be shifting stuff around while I'm doing that. Alright, now to go to the Spears and Munzel disc. And this is how you find out the default contrast setting. If 1, it's clipping out of the box, or 2, if they left some contrast on the table, and you can turn it up and get a little bit higher. First, you need to disable the light sensor settings, the auto tone curve, and luminance levels. So I turn those off, and then again, so with your contrast, you can either be clipping whites or color details, and with the Spears and Munzel disc, there's a couple of patterns that you can use to find this out. The Disney Wow disc will only show you the white clipping. I don't think it has anything for color clipping. So on this screen, I've adjusted the camera a little bit so you can kind of mostly see, except it actually flashes a little more than what the camera's picking up. And then if you look at the red, green, and blue boxes, you can see a little dark box in the middle flashing. So as you turn up the contrast, that stops. That means it's clipping out some of your colors, and now going so high that the white clips and the white stops flashing. So we pull it back down again and then start going up, and the idea is just to find the point where you're not clipping anything, but it's also as high as you can get it without clipping. So 95, there's no white clipping and only very minor color clipping, but I do suggest 93 overall because 93 has no clipping. And we're about to find that out as I go to the next pattern. So there's an actual clipping pattern right here. And at 95, where I didn't see any on the previous pattern, you can see on these squares that at 95 there was a little bit. So the camera's struggling to show this. But you're supposed to just see like square within a square within a square within a square. So, and 93 again is the highest where I saw absolutely none. 94 I didn't really see any clipping either, but just to be safe, put it on 93. So that's what I'm going to use throughout the settings in this video, is 93 on the contrast. Alright, now for the black level setting, leave it alone, leave it at 50. I was just double checking with the pattern here, but as you turn it up, it basically turns your blacks into grays. But at 50, it's not clipping anything, and just leave it there. So while I'm in here, I'm going to put up the 15% full field, check for any banding, grid effect, any kind of issues. The strobing is an effect of the camera, not the TV. Turning up the ISO to make it brighter than what I'm seeing, but again, this panel is pretty clean, no real issues. The camera, like I said, is just struggling with the strobing right there. Alright, now switching over to an all white field. You can see a little bit of the pink tint, and then I try to move the camera around a little bit so you can see how the pink tint moves based on your angle. In real content, it's extremely hard to see it, but you can just see how that moves around based on how you're looking at it. Now, there's nothing you can do about the pink tint. It's a side effect of the new panel, and if you've heard anything about green tint, that's separate. That has to do with your color white point. That can be calibrated out. So now, for the next few minutes, I'm going to be going through this same scene over and over, making adjustments to all of the motion settings, so feel free to skip ahead if you don't care about this and you're going to use whatever motion you want. But if you want to see how the motion looks on the TV with different settings, you can watch this. Personally, I ended up using the smoothness at minimum, the clearness at 1, and then Cinemotion. Cinemotion is a very important setting because if it's wrong, you're going to get frame skips or stutters, and it's pretty obvious when that happens, and it's because of the Cinemotion not being set properly to the content that you're watching. So some content will need it to be on high, some on low, and some you can just leave it off. So, for example, if I'm watching Smallville on Hulu and it's streaming and it's a television show, if it is on high, I get immediately obvious frame skips or stutters. Changing it to low or off fixes it entirely. So anyone saying there's motion problems with the TV, there's not. It's because their Cinemotion setting is wrong. And I've also noticed that it will change by itself from time to time. So, just if you are seeing frame skips or stutters, check to make sure your Cinemotion setting is set correctly. The motion flow stuff, all personal preference. Turn it off, turn it on max, turn on auto, whatever you want to do, it's up to you. So I'm just going to quit talking through the rest of this motion part, and then I'll pick back up again at the end of this. Oh, and if you do notice the image getting dimmer, that's because clearness. Clearness is black frame insertion, and as you go higher with it, the image will get dimmer and dimmer, and with clearness at max, there is noticeable flickering in the image. Alright, and here's one last playthrough with nothing else on the screen, using my recommended settings with smoothness at minimum, clearness at 1, and Cinemotion on low. Alright, now that we know what settings we want to use, I'm going to start with the standard picture preset, and I'm going to adjust this one for sports. So contrast 93, gamma at 0, turn off all the processing stuff. Peak luminance for sports, I'm assuming it's going to be bright room, so you either want medium or high. Color, put back to default 50. Make sure your color temperature is on either Expert 1 or Expert 2. They're both identical, it's just when you make advanced changes, it saves to whichever one, so that way you can have two different sets of color. Sharpness, put at 50, that's neutral. Reality creation, that's personal preference, depends on the content you're watching, but putting it to manual 20 for pretty much everything works pretty well. It's not intrusive or distracting. Noise reductions, turn off. Smooth gradation, I just leave it at low. If you do too high on it, it can remove some detail. So for sports, that's very motion sensitive and personal preference again. But I would think having smoothness at 2 and then clearness either minimum or 1, depending how much brightness you need, would be good for sports. And then here, the basic color adjustment for the 2-point, if you just lower your red a little bit and then your blue down to -6 or 8, that will put you closer to a D65 white point. So if you think things look a little bluish, greenish, whatever, try that, see what you think. You can very easily reset it back to normal. The only thing is, any changes you make to that will be universal across all your picture preset modes. And the 10-point, I'm just showing no changes were made. And again, down here in the color adjustment, no changes were made. So if you do have changes made to those, you get a calibration done, that's going to save to either Expert 1 or Expert 2, depending which one you do it on. Alright, so I reset those 2 points just for these settings. Again, that's an optional thing for you to try out. And then I moved the camera, zoomed it in a little bit to make this easier. So for cinema, I'm going to set that up for dark room movie viewing or dark room TV viewing. I personally like 150 nits. The standard's supposed to be 100. And also you want 2.4 gamma, so put the gamma to -2. If you have peak luminance off and your brightness is at max, that's 100 nits. If you put it to low, that's 150. So I use 100 or low because I want 150. And again, sharpness 50, reality creation manual 20, smooth gradation low. Motion settings, I put smoothness to minimum, clearness to 1. So you do lose a little bit of brightness by changing that to 1. But it's not enough to really affect too much of that 100 nits or 150 nits. Alright, so Cinemotion for movies, this mode, I'm going to leave it at high to start with. And again, if you see any issues with frame skips or stuttering, try low and try it off if you absolutely have to. Again, just showing you can change the white point if you want to. It depends. There is no right or wrong white point. It's just depends on if you want the D65 standard and what looks good to you. Alright, one quick pass through again. Make sure everything's set right for our cinema mode, which again is for SDR nighttime viewing. Now when you go into HDR content, all of these picture presets will have the same settings in HDR. Dolby Vision is different, but your cinema will be the same in HDR, your custom will be the same in HDR, and so on. So if you need more picture preset modes, download the Calman for Bravia app, and after you launch it, it should unlock Custom for Pro 1 and Custom for Pro 2. That way you have 2 extra modes, so you can set one individually for SDR, one for HDR, and have an extra one for whatever other content you may need one for. Alright, now for game mode, Again, most of it's the same, and most of it's the same because the TV really is very good out of the box. Not a whole lot of changes are needed. Just going to bump the contrast that little bit to 93, keep gamma at 0, peak luminance, medium or high, depending on how bright you want your SDR gaming. I use high. Make sure you're on color 50 and color temp is expert 1. A lot of this stuff is grayed out because it's in game mode and it doesn't need the processing features, or that would increase the input lag. So game mode, super simple, very easy, not a whole lot to change. Now use the graphics mode for PC or desktop use, and this one you really don't want even as much stuff as messed with as with game mode because it's a monitor. So the brightness I turned down just a little bit because to me, I don't really want to be staring at a bright monitor, but that's up to you. So I put it back to max so that you can adjust the peak luminance, get down to the 100 nits, but really just play with the brightness based on what's comfortable for your eyes. And then pretty much just make sure everything's off, everything else. Even reality creation, I would have that off when being used as a monitor. Alright, now we're going to go over to custom, and custom is going to be SDR bright or daytime viewing. So again, contrast 93, gamma at 0 to target 2.2, peak luminance, medium, high, whatever, based on your room, how bright it is. And everything else, pretty much the same. At this point, you should have the hang of it. I would start with Cinemotion on low, make sure you're not getting any frame skips, switch it to high or off if you do. So another thing to keep in mind, all of these changes, they are input or source dependent, so you will have to go through this on every HDMI input or again on your apps if you use the built-in TV apps. It's one of the reasons I don't. Alright, now we will move over to HDR and Dolby Vision. So, to me, if viewing HDR Dolby Vision content, I want to use the bright accurate mode, which is Dolby Vision Bright, or the custom mode in HDR. So, with Dolby Vision, you really just want to leave everything alone. Just a few little things turn off, but you don't want to mess with any values. So, here, if you were to have a calibration done for SDR and you don't want it to use that for its algorithm, switch it to Expert 2, and again, when you make those advanced changes, they tie to whichever expert color mode you're on, so you can have your SDR calibrated to in one way on Expert 1, and then have your Dolby Vision be separate using Expert 2. And also in Dolby Vision and HDR, I recommend having clearness on the minimum or just having it off. That way you don't lose any brightness from the black frame insertion. Alright, now for HDR custom mode. Again, everything carried over from our SDR settings. For HDR tone mapping, that's only going to show up here in HDR. You want that on gradation preferred. I forgot to mention on Dolby Vision you want it off. And again, if you want to have your custom separate for SDR and HDR, download the Kalman for Bravia app to unlock those extra picture mode settings and do it that way. But generally everything's fine to be the same. This is the only difference right here, is I would suggest clearness at minimum for HDR and on 1 for SDR. Again, that's because of the brightness that you lose a little bit of when you have it on. So if you don't mind switching that, then you can make do with the one picture mode, or just leave it at minimum for both. Now for HDR Gaming, again, game mode settings carry over. So all you have to do is make sure that you are on gradation preferred for the HDR tone mapping, and that you turn it off whenever you adjust the HDR sliders in games or on the console, and then you turn it back to gradation preferred after making that adjustment. Alright, now our modes are all set. I'm going to show a little bit of content after making the changes, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about accuracy. Having oversaturated colors or inaccurate settings, I know there's a lot of people who feel like it adds extra pop or it looks really good, but in reality it's low-hanging fruit, if you understand that reference. And I'm going to have a video pretty soon explaining why having it accurate is better, even if it doesn't necessarily seem that way to you right now. Also, like, I've seen people say that, you know, the warmer color temperatures look yellowish or whatever, that that's just your eyes aren't used to it. You know, if you've been watching years and years of a, you know, bluer color temperature, and then all of a sudden you set it to what it should be, then it's going to look overly warm to you. But within a few days, your eyes should adjust, and then anything different will just look too blue. Alright, I know this was really long for a settings video, but I keep getting, you know, some people want me to do a fast video just clicking through the remote and showing the settings, and that's it. Other people want explanation or more in-depth. So this is a kind of full start to finish setup, all your settings, get everything done right and not have to mess with it again. And then I will probably have a shorter, just click through the settings, you know, in 5 minutes or less, whatever video. But this is the longer in-depth one. I did not go over any 10-point, 20-point controls, any of the advanced stuff. That will come later after I get a spectroradiometer so that I can profile my meter. The A80J, excellent TV. Review is coming up soon. And I guess that's it for this. So thanks for watching. Have a good one.